Okay guys, today we're going to solve quadratic equations or equations that are in the quadratic form. And these are a little different. Mathematically they're easy number-wise, but just understanding what you're doing is a little tricky at first. And we talked about this a little bit today in class, and we want to look at what it means to be in quadratic form. Notice in quadratic form you have an x in the middle, and then you have an x squared. Okay, we talked about this a little bit, but what that means is to be in quadratic form, if we had an equation, and these won't factor, I'm just making them up as we go along, but if we had something like 3x to the fourth plus 5x squared minus 12 equals 0. The middle term is an x squared, and the first term is an x to the fourth, which is x squared squared. So this one is in a quadratic form. It has an x squared, and then it has the same thing squared. So you could factor this if it would factor using those numbers. Okay, if we had something that had an x to the, let's just start in the middle. If we had an x to the third in the middle, it would have an x to the sixth in the beginning, because this is x cubed squared gives you the 6. You could have something like the square root of x here. If we take the square root of x and we square it, well, a square root squared, they cancel, so this is just an x. So if you had a square root of x and an x, and then you had numbers here, that would be a quadratic form. If we have x to the negative 1, well, if I squared that x to the negative 1, I'm going to get x to the negative 2. So if I had something with numbers in here, then that would be in the quadratic form. Okay? So that's what it means. So you're looking for, basically you're looking for a trinomial that has just a number on the end, and then this number, this power is squared over here. Then it's in a quadratic form. Okay, so you wrote these down in your notes. So I'm going to put this here, and if you didn't write this down, then you can pause the video and get all of that written down in your notes. This is not how your book does it. Your book does what is called U substitution, and I just think it's a little early for you to be doing U substitutions. You will get into those in some higher math classes, but right now I think we can do this way just fine. So, hold on. Okay, yeah, just put it there. So we're going to start by working out this example. So when we look for the quadratic form, this is in the middle x squared. If we squared it, we would have x to the fourth. So you could think about this as x squared squared minus 8x squared minus 9 equals 0. So if we're looking at it, you've got this squared and then just that. So if you've got ax squared minus bx plus c equals 0. So it's the same idea, but instead of having an x and an x squared, we have x squared and x to the fourth. So then when we go to get our parentheses, sorry guys, my pencil broke. When we go to get our parentheses, normally if we have ax squared plus bx plus c, and we factor these first two, get x terms, and then you have something over here. Well, so whatever's here is here and here, and then when we multiply it, we get the square. So whatever's in here is what's going to be here and here. So we're going to have x squared times x squared, because x squared times x squared gives you x to the fourth. Okay, so then just like before, you have to find a number. Since this is just a 1 here, you just need numbers that multiply to -9 and add to -8, which would be -9, +1. If you're not sure about those, you can always go over and make you a chart. To get -9, you could have -1 times +9. You could have +1 times -9. You could have -3 times +3, and then figure out which one adds to give you -8. So you've got the 1 and the -9. Now you have two factors. You can set each factor equal to 0. So you have x squared minus 9 equals 0. X squared plus 1 equals 0. This one could you could factor that into a difference of squares, but we're going to get the same answer doing it this way. So x squared equals 9, and then when you take the square root of both of those, you get x equals plus or minus 3. So right here, to get from here to here, you have to take the square root of x squared, so take the square root of 9, and that's how we get plus or minus 3. And then over here, x squared equals -1. The square root of both sides here gives us x equals plus or minus the square root of -1, and the square root of -1 we write as I. So if you can tell, you have 4 answers here. X equals +3, -3, +I, and -I. And all of those are your answers. Okay? Next example, x to the -2 minus x to the -1 minus 6 equals 0. So now we have x to the -1, -1 to the second power, which means you would multiply it, gives you -2. So this is in the form of a quadratic because we have x to the -1 squared minus x to the -1 minus 6 equals 0. So our x is going to be x to the -1. Then this one is a simpler one. You have 1, -1, and -6. So we need numbers that multiply to -6 and add to -1, which would be -3 and +2. So those are our two factors. Set each one equal to 0. X to the -1 equals 3. Now, how do I get rid of that power? Well, to get rid of it, there's a couple different ways that you could do it. I'll show you a different way on each one. One way that you could get rid of it is to make this a +1 so that it's just x to the first power. You need to raise this to the -1 power. So you have to do the same thing to both sides. So -1 times -1 gives you a plain x. And then 3 to the -1 power, you rewrite that as 1 over 3. That 3 moves down, and the exponent changes to positive. So x equals 1/3. Now, another way that you could do this, we get x to the -1 equals -2. Another way that you could do this is you could rewrite this. X to the -1 means 1 over x equals -2. Then if you solve for x, you could make that -2 a fraction by putting it over 1. So then you'd say 1 times 1 is 1. X times -2 is -2x. Divide by -2. And x equals -1/2. Okay, so your two answers here are x equals 1/3 and x equals -1/2. Okay, so you could, either way, you could flip the x down and go from there, or you could do it this way. Okay, so if you need to, you may need to go back and rewatch some of these because I know this is a little bit different. Now the checkpoints are here. The best thing to do is to pause the video, try the checkpoint, and then come back and check it. I have to do these videos in less than 15 minutes or I can't upload them to YouTube because that's the only way I know how to do this at the moment. So pause it and then come back, and then I'm going to explain these and go through them kind of quickly so that I can get my time in. So now I hope that you have tried these on your own. The first one is in the form of x squared, squared, and then an x squared here. So our parentheses are going to have x squared and x squared. And then we need to multiply to 12 and add to -7. So that's going to be -3 and -4. Again, if you have trouble with that, go over and just write all the factors of 12 and see which way you could get -4. So then we're going to say x squared minus 3 equals 0. X squared minus 4 equals 0. When I set that and solve it, that means x is plus or minus the square root of 3. And set that one equal to 4. So x is plus or minus the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. So again, we have 4 answers: 2, -2, square root of 3, and negative square root of 3. Okay. B, 9x to the 4th minus 37x squared plus 4 equals 0. So again, this is the same variable set up. We've got x squared and x to the 4th. So our variables are going to be x squared and x squared. Now this one is a little different because we don't have a 1 here. We have a number. So what I'm going to do it the divide and slide method. So in divide and slide, we take the 9 and multiply it by 4. 9 times 4 is 36. Then we go from there and do the same thing that you were doing before. What would multiply to 36 but add to -37, so it's going to be -36 and -1. So now we divided, we multiplied, so now the divide and slide part comes in. We had to multiply by 9 here. We multiplied 9 times 4, so now we're going to divide both of these by 9. If it divides, you divide it. If not, you slide it. Reduce and slide. This doesn't divide. 36 does not divide by 9. Well, 36 does divide by 9, actually. 36 divided by 9 is 4. So you have x squared minus 4. This one does not divide by 9, so you slide it. So you have 9x squared minus 1 equals 0. So that's your factors. So then set each factor equal to 0. So x squared equals 4. X equals plus or minus 2. 9x squared equals 1. X squared equals 1/9. X is plus or minus 1/3 because it's the square root of each one. Okay, so I have another minute, so let me do that again. You've got 9x squared minus 1 equals 0. So you move the 1 over. 9x squared equals 1. Divide by 9. X squared equals 1/9. Take the square root of both sides. And then the square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 9 is 3. Okay, so that one is the quadratic. So for the quadratic one here, you want to do your assignment for this one. This part of it is page 128, numbers 17 through 23 odd. 17 through 23 odd. Remember, there's one that says 8 over x. You could write that as 8 times x to the -1. Okay, so do those problems, check them in the back of the book, and I'll help you when I get back.